Jovan Buha! Buha!
Yo, I'm Jovan Buha, Lakers beat writer for The Athletic, and welcome to episode 38 of Buha's Block. The Lakers drafted Bronny James at number 55 in what was probably the least surprising selection of the 2024 NBA draft. I just got back from the Lakers practice facility where Rob Pelinka spoke to us after the draft and shared insight into why the Lakers drafted Bronny James, why they view this as one of the biggest moments in sports history, and why they feel like the first father and son duo should play together in a Lakers uniform. So there's a lot to get into here. This is a very complex and polarizing topic. It's almost become a bit political with people on one side or the other of the Lakers drafting Bronny, of LeBron's involvement in this, and Rich Paul's involvement in this, Clutch Sports' involvement in this, Bronny James's lack of involvement apparently in this, or seemingly in this rather. So there's a lot to unpack with this whole situation. And for me, I don't view it as black or white as many people do. I'm somewhere in the middle. I'm somewhere in a bit of a gray area. Looking at the number 55 pick, more often than not, that player does not pan out. And when we think about teams taking swings on seniors or international prospects or draft and stashes, more often than not, the number 55 pick does not play a single second in the NBA. So the level of scrutiny around this pick is a little puzzling, because if Bronny's name was Bronny Smith and it was not Bronny James and the Lakers selected him, I think there would be a lot less issue with it. I mean, it would be surprising for sure, and people would potentially criticize it or just wonder why the Lakers drafted a one and done player who averaged 4.8 points per game with the number 55 pick. But again, looking at the history of the number 55 pick, that player rarely even plays in the NBA or gets a guaranteed contract. And certainly it makes sense why there's all this attention and spotlight, and that comes with being LeBron James' son, being part of the James family, being associated with the Lakers. But I just find it a little funny that people are really harping on the Lakers wasted the number 55 pick. They selected this guy. And yes, there were some interesting prospects still available and some guys that are potentially going to be rotation players at some point down the road. And maybe the Lakers will regret not having taken one of those guys over Bronny James. But more often than not, when you are the fourth to last pick in the draft, because this year there was 58 picks instead of 60, that player is just not going to ever play a minute in the NBA. I just think people are making too much of the opportunity cost here with the Lakers spending the number 55 pick on Bronny James, when if they didn't draft Bronny, they likely would have drafted a guy who they would have signed to a two-way contract, and that player would have potentially never played. To me, it's just much to do about nothing. Now, as for the nepotism claims, let's go back to Bronny Smith instead of Bronny James. If Bronny is Bronny Smith and his dad is not LeBron James, is he a Los Angeles Laker today? Does he get drafted with the number 55 pick? Most likely not. He likely is not drafted with the number 55 pick. He likely does not leave USC. He's likely returning for his sophomore season. But based on the intel coming out of the combine and how Bronny impressed there, how he impressed in the couple of workouts that he did with the Lakers and Suns, there was buzz that even if he didn't get drafted, and if for whatever reason the Lakers weren't going to draft him and add him to the roster, that he was going to get looks as a two-way guy or as an Exhibit 10 guy. And his agent, Rich Paul, Clutch Sports CEO, put it out there that Bronny was not going to sign a two-way or an Exhibit 10 deal, so they snuffed that out. But there was going to be interest in Bronny regardless of the name, regardless of if it meant having a shot to land LeBron James. As for the nepotism stuff, it's like, and again, this is just a thorny topic, but we could look at Thanasis Antetokounmpo and his situation in Milwaukee of, is he on an NBA roster, if not for his brother, Giannis Antetokounmpo? We could look at the complex situation with the Roses and the Brunsons in New York, where Leon Rose, who is the president of basketball operations for the Knicks, is the former agent of assistant coach Rick Brunson. He's also the godfather of Knicks star Jalen Brunson, and Jalen Brunson, obviously the son of Rick Brunson, and his agent Sam Rose is the son of Leon Rose. So there's a lot of relationships and familial ties and influence, and like this is a relationship business at the end of the day, and you see this stuff across all levels of the NBA, at the ownership level, in front offices, with agents, with players, again to some extent. Like there's been players that have been sons of former players that have gotten certain looks or gotten certain attention just because of who their father was, and not at the level of Bronny and LeBron, of course, but this isn't the first time that this has happened. Maybe the first time in this way, and that player joining his father's team and them potentially playing together. But this is not the first time that a player has gotten drafted or gotten attention during the draft process because of who his father was. You could look at players, coaches, front offices, ownership, and then you could also apply this to other forms of business. How many CEOs pass down their company to their children, or people in management are constantly hiring their children or hiring their nephews and nieces or family friends. Like this is how the business world works to some extent. And yes, sports is supposed to be a meritocracy, but even in sports, there is a level of nepotism. I don't know if Bronny Smith gets drafted the way that Bronny James Jr. does, but to just put this all on LeBron and Clutch and Rich Paul and the Lakers and criticize them and flame them, I think it's being short-sighted, and it's really just picking and choosing when you want to call out nepotism. Because again, you look at ownership, you look at front offices, you look at agents and coaches and even other players and situations, there's always some form of nepotism, especially at the back end of a roster, which Bronny's ultimately going to make the Lakers as the 15th man. And again, you've seen other situations where guys have brothers or cousins or brother-in-laws getting on rosters, getting two-way deals, being the 14th or 15th man. So like this is not an isolated situation. It just so happens that LeBron is arguably the greatest basketball player of all time and arguably the most famous basketball player of all time. And because of that, there's an added layer of scrutiny and criticism and attention. And then you throw in the Lakers and it's just this monster story that people can't stop talking about. This is, again, a very thorny topic to navigate, and I'm sure even some of the things I said, I'm trying to be in the middle as much as possible, but I'm sure I'm going to upset some people. It's not my intention. Like, look, if you don't think the Lakers should have drafted Bronny, if you have an issue with it, like that's fine. It's understandable to an extent, and I will get into one potential issue with all of this in my takeaways from today's draft selection. I just think regardless of how you feel, more often than not, no one cares about the number 55 pick. Teams do not get flamed for who they take at number 55 because more often than not, that player never signs a guaranteed contract. So the fact that they decided to choose Bronny instead of like an international prospect or some junior or senior who was good in college but isn't going to be good at the NBA level, I don't think that is some indictment of LeBron or the Lakers. And then looking at it through the prism of nepotism, like nepotism is rampant across the league. Nepotism is at every level of the NBA world. It is at other levels of sports, and it is all over the business world at large. Like this is how America was built. This is how companies are built, business. Like this is just how things work. There's always like those who have power usually bring their family into it, and they want to work with their kids. And the fact that LeBron and Bronny have a chance to be the first active father-son duo in NBA history and the first father-son duo to be teammates is something special. And again, regardless of how you feel about LeBron, Bronny, Clutch, Rich Paul, the Lakers, this whole situation, I just think this is a cool moment on multiple fronts. I will get into my takeaways from the selection in a moment, but I quickly wanted to say the Lakers also signed two-way guys. So they signed Armel Traore, and they also signed Blake Hinson. So I will touch on those guys a little bit later in my takeaways in terms of their skill set, but those are a couple of two-way forwards / bigs that the Lakers added per Shams Charania of The Athletic. With all that said, let's get into my 5 takeaways from the Lakers drafting Bronny James. Takeaway number 1 is this is history. And this is the way that Rob Pelinka opened up his press conference with his opening statement about Bronny James. And I know that some people had an issue with that, him focusing more on the history of this, the spectacle of this, and not Bronny necessarily as a player or as a prospect. But again, Bronny and LeBron have the chance to be the first father-son duo in NBA history. They also have the chance to be the first father-son duo as teammates in NBA history. And I think it must be said that the fact that Bronny is getting drafted and able to still play basketball less than a year after suffering cardiac arrest and having to have surgery for a congenital heart defect, like that alone is a miracle. And that is like, if there was another player that got taken in the second round who went through what Bronny went through to get here, I think that would be a Sports Center feature. I think that would be like the feel-good story of the draft. And I get why it's not. People are going to point to the name and the fact that he averaged 4.8 points and 2.8 rebounds and 2.1 assists. And on paper did not look like an NBA prospect during his 25 games at USC. But I just think sometimes like sports is supposed to be fun, and sports is about stories. And the father-son story is something we've seen in baseball with the Griffeys. And like we've seen it in football. And I just think seeing it at the NBA level is something that's cool. And it's something that's awesome and something that's going to be memorable. And once the dust settles, and we'll eventually see what type of player Bronny is, and maybe he flames out within 2-3 years of the NBA, and maybe LeBron doesn't re-sign with the Lakers, and maybe he goes elsewhere, and they end up being the first active father-son duo, but they don't end up actually being teammates together. Like there are a lot of ways that this can play out, but just for taking it at face value and what it is, I just think people can be too cynical with this type of stuff and too reactionary and trying to fire off their hot takes and whatnot. And again, I get it. Like there are players that went undrafted or went after Bronny that are better than him on paper, that could very well be better NBA players. And the fact that he got a certain draft spot in large part because of his name and because of his connection to his dad. There's certainly like a level of scrutiny and skepticism and criticism with all of that. But I think this is dope. And if you have an issue with it, more power to you. Like I understand it to an extent, but instead of looking at the moment itself, a lot of people just went straight to criticism. From a historical perspective, I think this is going to be a moment that we remember for quite a long time. Takeaway number 2 is Bronny has NBA traits. And again, as I alluded to earlier in this episode, like Bronny was starting to get buzz as a late second round pick, or ideally for a lot of teams as a two-way guy, as an Exhibit 10 guy. And Rich Paul and Clutch were not going to allow him to be a two-way or Exhibit 10 guy, so that wasn't really a possibility. But again, if they took those constraints off, like I think Bronny was going to be on an NBA team, whether he was drafted by the Lakers or not. So I want to just make that point very clear. And big reason why is, so Bronny is 6'2", 210 pounds, with a 6'7" wingspan. He projects as an off guard and as something of a 3-and-D guard. That's the way that Rob Pelinka referred to him in the post-draft press conference. So looking at it, 6'7" with he's 6'1" without shoes, so 6'2" with shoes. But a 6'7" wingspan, it's like 6'7" and a quarter, with a 6'1" frame. That's impressive. That is a +6 wingspan. So he's got the long arms to defend point guards and even some shooting guards. He has a 40.5-inch vertical, which was the 6th best vertical at the NBA Combine. So he's one of the best athletes in this draft. He tested very well from an agility and speed perspective. So like Bronny has the NBA body. Again, he's on a little bit on the smaller side. It would be better if he was like 6'3" or 6'4", but even at 6'1" with this 6'7" wingspan, and again, 6'2" in shoes, he's got the massive vertical. He's got the speed. He's got the athleticism. He's 210 pounds, which is big for someone 6'1". So he's got that NBA ready body already. And he's clearly strong and quick and athletic. And from a physicality and athleticism perspective, there are no doubts that he can play at the NBA level. He was also cleared to play by the NBA's fitness to play panel. So he was cleared, and there's no medical red flags as of right now. Then looking at his defense, like this is the one thing that Bronny, I think, can potentially excel in, depending on how he continues to develop and mature as a basketball player. And that's what you look for in a second round prospect, especially toward the end of the draft, is do they have an NBA ready skill? Do they have a potential role that you can plug them into? And with Bronny, it's his point of attack defense. He is a hound defensively. He could defend either backcourt spot. He profiles as a potential lockdown defender, and he's not necessarily going to be that player from day one, but as a 19-year-old, he has the potential to grow into that guy at age 21, 22, 23. So he is more of a long-term prospect, and that is the way the Lakers are going to be treating him and grooming him and developing him. But he compared himself to Drew Holiday and Derek White and Davion Mitchell, and wide range there in terms of outcomes and talent. Like Drew is a former All-Star. Derek White is one of the best role players in the league, I guess. Like, although he was almost an All-Star this past season with Boston. Davion Mitchell is a solid bench player. As of now, Bronny has a ways to go to sniff being the type of offensive player that Drew Holiday or Derek White currently are. And that might not even be within his wheelhouse based on what we've seen from him as a ball handler, as a one-on-one scorer, as a passer. He's still got a long way to improve. But I think the fact that he compared himself to those guys shows a level of self-awareness and realistic expectations for him, where again, Drew Holiday and Derek White are really, really good players, and if he becomes one of those two, like that is that becomes a great value for the Lakers. And that's one of the best players in this draft, frankly. Like anyone from this draft would love to come away with it with a Drew Holiday or a Derek White. So those might be unrealistic, or at least until we see more growth from Bronny, that might be unrealistic. But the fact that he's already framing himself as a 3-and-D prospect and as more of a role player type and more of an off-ball type, I think that shows that he has a good idea of his strengths and weaknesses. And he's not saying he's going to be a Steph Curry or a Damian Lillard or a Kyrie Irving. Like he's not being unrealistic with what he can actually do on the basketball floor. So is the upside there for a Drew Holiday or Derek White? That remains to be seen. Could he be a Davion Mitchell? I think that's realistic. I think he could get to that level. And I think that's probably selling himself even a little bit short, potentially, depending on how he develops as a shooter and how he can develop as a secondary ball handler and as a playmaker. But he's got a rare level of maturity, especially for someone who's been in the spotlight the way that he has his entire life and dealing with this cardiac arrest and dealing with the scrutiny at USC and then deciding to come out and all the attention and criticism he's gotten over the last few months. Like he's developed a thick skin, and I think he has a really good head on his shoulders. And by all accounts, he's a hard worker. He's not egotistical. He's not arrogant. He doesn't come in with a sense of entitlement, and he's really about doing the work and loving basketball. And he's also 19, so he's going to continue to grow and mature just as a young man and who he ultimately becomes. But by all accounts, he's a really good dude. And you don't just draft a player based on being a good dude, but when you look at the genetics and the pedigree of who his dad is, and you look at the fact that he was a McDonald's All-American his senior year, and the fact that at one point ESPN had him as a projected first-round pick before the cardiac arrest, there were signs that Bronny was going to be an NBA player, a true NBA prospect, a potential first-round pick at one point. So I think there's been some revisionist history as to how good he was, how good he was projected to be, and certainly the cardiac arrest, and that was a significant setback. That was a very serious situation. But I just think he has the physical and athletic tools. He has a NBA level skill in his perimeter defense, specifically on the ball, hounding, navigating screens. Like he projects as a good defender. It's just going to be a matter of his shot and his other ball handling and passing abilities. And that leads us to takeaway number 3, which is Bronny's shot is going to determine his NBA future. Let me explain. So Bronny shot 27% on threes at USC. He shot 39% in his senior season of high school and AAU basketball. So that's a significant gap. And that's something we could potentially attribute to him missing several months of basketball and him never getting that rhythm. He reportedly shot it well at the combine. Rob Pelinka also said that he shot it really well in his workout with the Lakers. So if he could become even an average 3-point shooter, if you combine that with his defense, like that is a player that could be a Davion Mitchell, DeAnthony Melton, Avery Bradley type. And as you saw, I got a little bit better with each player comparison. But Bronny could be that type of player. And that type of player could be a very valuable bench guard who comes in and plays 15 to 25 minutes, or if he becomes more like an Avery Bradley, potentially a guy who's a starter, like more of a fifth starter, and that guy can defend either backcourt spot. He's just locking into his assignment that night, and then he's hitting and taking open shots, and you can't cheat off of him, because you could cheat off Bronny at USC. And if he's shooting 39%, or again, even somewhere in like the 34 to 36% range, that is much more difficult to do. He does project more as a shooting guard, more as an off-ball guy. He doesn't have the level of ball handling and playmaking skills that you would want from a lead ball handler. So again, the key for him is going to be developing his three-point shot to a level where you can't ignore him. And as long as he can be a competent three-point shooter, and as long as he continues to improve defensively, and who knows, maybe he even grows another inch or so. LeBron ended up growing an inch in the NBA from 6'8" to 6'9", and also filled out and put on, the 20, 30 pounds of muscle in the NBA. So if Bronny continues to get a little bit bigger, and maybe he grows to 6'2", 6'2.5", and that makes him 6'3", or maybe even 6'4" in shoes, and all of a sudden he beefs up a little bit to 220, 225, like that is the type of defensive archetype where he can really lock into point guards, lock into shooting guards. And again, if he could just be an adequate three-point shooter, that player has value. It's probably a bench player, and it's probably more of like an eighth man, if anything, but that player has value, and that player could be making double-digit millions a year. So I think that the biggest thing for Bronny is going to be living in the gym and just improving as a shooter, regaining his shooting stroke. And if he can do that, I do think there is a pathway to him eventually becoming a rotation player. Takeaway number 4 is LA is already designing a player development plan for Bronny. One thing that Rich Paul made clear from the start of this process was that any team that drafted Bronny James needed to have a plan in place to develop him and to help him maximize his basketball potential, maximize his basketball ceiling. Rob Pelinka mentioned it. I asked him a follow-up question on it, and he didn't have a great answer, because he said that the Lakers are still forming JJ Redick's staff, and once they hire the rest of his assistant coaches and put in some of the player development guys, that they will be able to start innovating and doing the things that they are trying to do in terms of player development. But that was the buzzword of JJ Redick's introductory press conference. All the Lakers could talk about was player development, and that's not something that LeBron James necessarily wants to hear, but if it has to do with his son, I'm sure on some level he wants to hear that. Pelinka said he and Redick are currently working on a plan for Bronny of how they want to develop his skill set. He hinted that it will likely be in the G League, so I do expect Bronny to primarily be in the G League his rookie season, and potentially even his sophomore season, depending on how he develops. We'll get a better idea of where he's at in Summer League, but he indicated that he just thinks Bronny needs to play basketball and get more reps under him, and that's where playing in the G League and just growing his game and growing his confidence could be invaluable for him. And the Lakers acknowledge he is a raw prospect. He is not someone who is a finished product. He's not someone like Dalton Connect who's going to just come in and potentially be a rotation player from day one. Bronny needs time and reps and development to become that type of player, if he ever becomes that type of player, which is within the realm of possibility that he never does. But the Lakers are taking that chance on him. They're taking the gamble on him, and only time will tell if this was a good pick or a bad pick. But the Lakers are confident that they can develop him. They see NBA potential in him, aside from even the LeBron connection. And remember, the backdrop to all this is the Lakers have not gotten any assurances that LeBron James is returning, per Sam Amick of The Athletic. So there is a chance that the Lakers draft Bronny and LeBron leaves. I do think that this likely solidifies LeBron returning, and that's the way that this probably ends up going. But we don't know. And LeBron has a decision to make by Saturday at 5 p.m. Eastern as to whether he's going to opt in or opt out. And if he opts out, he could easily resign and on a 2 or 3 year deal. And it's much to do about nothing. But there's also a chance he could look elsewhere and potentially sign with another team or ask for a sign-in trade. So we still don't know what's going to happen with LeBron James. Even with that, the Lakers chose to draft Bronny. They wanted to do it for multiple reasons. Part of it was to show LeBron, we're going to take care of you. We're going to take care of your son. And they pride themselves on being the type of organization that takes care of their stars and caters to them and does things that they want. And even though LeBron has walked back this idea of playing with Bronny, it was something that he was public about for a while before over the last year kind of changing his tune. So I think the Lakers wanted to send him a message of we are trying to upgrade the roster. It is difficult to find something on the trade market. And that's a whole other conversation that I'm not fully buying. But at least on the Bronny front, they were like, we're going to draft your son. We're going to give him a guaranteed contract. And that's how serious we are about making this happen for you, keeping you happy, and hopefully keeping this partnership going for at least a couple more years. Finally, takeaway number 5 is the Lakers are facing a roster crunch. Now, let me explain. So Bronny, if he gets a guaranteed contract, which all signs are he's going to get a guaranteed contract. Again, Rich Paul said he's not going to sign a two-way deal or an Exhibit 10 deal. So he's going to get a guaranteed roster spot. And if he gets that, that brings the Lakers to 10 players with guaranteed contracts for next season. And that's before factoring in the 4 player options for LeBron James, D'Angelo Russell, Cam Reddish, and Jackson Hayes. And that's before factoring in their 3 free agents in Max Christie, who's a restricted free agent, Taurean Prince, and Spencer Dinwiddie. And that's also before factoring in any potential additions that they want to make in free agency. So if those 4 players opt in or re-sign with the Lakers, and I think it would only be LeBron re-signing and maybe D'Lo, depending on the number, the Lakers could have as many as 14 players under contract with guaranteed contracts entering free agency, at which point you have to choose between Max Christie, Taurean Prince, and Spencer Dinwiddie, and you can't sign anyone else unless you waive someone, which you still eat that money, but you create a roster spot, or you could do a consolidation trade where you trade a 2-for-1, 3-for-1, 3-for-2, some type of trade like that to open up a roster spot or not. But you have to have a certain trade partner that has something you want and that is willing to take on some of these players that you might not want, has the cap space, and you might have to attach a pick or something to get that type of deal done. So the Lakers are potentially in a situation where they are running out of roster spots. And this is where I think if you want to criticize the selection of Bronny James, this is my one criticism of it is on paper, he projects more as a two-way or Exhibit 10 guy. And had the Lakers drafted him at 55, but signed him to a two-way contract, I think that would make a lot more sense from the Lakers' perspective. Now, I get why it doesn't make sense from Bronny's perspective. I get why it doesn't make sense from LeBron's perspective or from Clutch's perspective. But the Lakers only have so many roster spots available. And the fact that they already had 8 players under contract, then they're adding 2 rookies who are going to get guaranteed contracts, they're just running out of roster spots. They have Bronny, who's unlikely to contribute as a rookie. They have Jalen Hood-Schifino and Maxwell Lewis, who, we'll see what they look like in Summer League. We'll see how they continue to develop as players. But there's a chance that those guys can't contribute as sophomores next season after really looking behind the curve as rookies. So you could have 3 players on your roster that aren't contributing. And that brings you down to 12. And that's to say nothing of a guy like Cam Reddish, who does not look like a rotation player on a good team. And potentially to say nothing of guys like Christian Wood and Jackson Hayes, who I have legitimate questions about in a playoff setting against other good teams. And if those guys could be viable big men in playoff series. Like Jackson Hayes was not able to play in the Denver series. I know people wanted him to play more, but he also did not play well in his limited minutes. The Lakers could be not only running out of roster spots, but also have several roster spots taken up by guys who aren't ultimately going to help them compete for a championship. And that's a problem. And that's part of this problem stems from them signing Reddish, Wood, and Hayes to 1+1 deals and giving those guys player options. Now that was partly to get those guys to sign in comparison to signing with other teams, like they were sweetening the pot a bit, but that is coming back to bite them potentially because Wood and Reddish just might not be rotation guys on a really good basketball team. Hayes, I have a little bit more confidence in a certain role, but really all 3 of them, I don't think are ideally in the Lakers like top 8 or 9. And if you have those guys clogging up roster spots, and then you also have Hood-Schifino, Lewis, and Bronny, again, that's 6 guys right there out of 15. And now you're down to a 9-man rotation and you got to pray that none of those guys get injured. Otherwise you're in a tough spot. And that's also relying on a rookie in Dalton Connect who should be a rotation guy, projects as a rotation guy, but we have no assurances of that. I mean, again, Jalen Hood-Schifino was the number 17 pick last year and he was not ready to contribute at the NBA level. Dalton Connect is a better player, better prospect, and is more NBA ready. So he should be able to, but we won't know that until we actually see it. So if you want to have one criticism of the Bronny selection, I think it's the fact that he's getting a guaranteed contract when he's unlikely to be a rotation caliber player. And when looking at the Lakers already facing a roster crunch, already having multiple guys who there are question marks about their ability to contribute in the regular season and their ability to contribute in the playoffs, I do have some concern about how this roster is potentially shaping up. Because if they re-sign, let's say the 4 guys opt in, and they don't trade D'Angelo Russell. I think they will try to trade D'Angelo Russell. But let's just say for argument's sake, the 4 guys opt in and then they re-sign Max Christie. All of a sudden, they're at 15 players, and the swaps that they made with the roster are they've swapped in Connect and Bronny for Taurean Prince and Spencer Dinwiddie. And that's probably fine if Connect can be better than Prince and Dinwiddie, which I think is a realistic possibility for him next season. But it gets a little dicey there in terms of like, I don't know how much better that roster actually is. Like there's a level of if they could be healthier, especially guys like Vanderbilt and Vincent, if they can just have better continuity and better coaching, like the Lakers can be better than they were last season. But I still think they have to make at least 1 or 2 trades to really jump up a significant level and put themselves on that true contender list. And as of now, it's unclear if they're going to be able to swing that. And on top of that, they're just running out of roster spots. So this is just something to monitor again as we project out. We'll see what happens with the player options. I think for the Lakers, it would be great if Cam Reddish opted out and they just let him walk elsewhere. Maybe he ends up in Milwaukee with Darvin Ham and Doc Rivers. And then I think for them, it would be great if D'Lo opted in and they were able to quickly trade him as part of a larger package for a better player or a better couple players. So there's still a lot of moving parts with the Lakers offseason. By no means is it settled yet. D'Lo is the big domino, but LeBron's the biggest domino, depending on what he wants to do. But assuming LeBron is back, D'Lo is the big domino. And then from that point on, it's what can the Lakers do on the trade market and what could they potentially do with one of their taxpayer exceptions, the taxpayer mid-level exception or the non-taxpayer mid-level exception. But a lot to chew on with this situation, and a lot will unfold within the next few days. But just wanted to bring to light that the Lakers are starting to face a roster crunch, and it is something that they're going to have to address if they really want to improve this roster. And finally, a bonus takeaway, my thoughts on the two-way guys. Did not know much about either one of them, but have been doing some research and reading about them. So Armel Traore, I don't know if I'm butchering his name. I'm trying to get the right pronunciation there. But Armel is a 6'9" power forward, kind of like a 4.5, like could be like a small ball 5. But he has a 7'3" wingspan. He is athletic. He's energetic. He's a good rebounder, a good finisher, and he can block shots. Now, does not have much of a shooting touch as a free throw shooter or much shooting range at all, and is pretty raw as a ball handler and a passer. But as a two-way guy, it's an interesting swing from the Lakers. We have not seen them sign this type of guy to a two-way contract. So I am intrigued by his potential, depending on what he looks like in Summer League. And we'll see if the Lakers end up keeping him as a two-way guy. But at least for Summer League, I'm interested in his skill set and how it translates at the Summer League level. And then with Blake Hinson, he's a knockdown shooter. This is another guy that the Lakers are bringing in, a 3-level scorer, an elite 3-point shooter, a guy who's about 6'7", 230 to 240 pounds. So he's either a big small forward or an undersized power forward, something like a stretch 4 or like a stretch 3.5. Does need to lose some weight, get into better shape. As of now, is a minus defender, can put the ball on the floor to get to the rim, but not much of a passer, does tend to have tunnel vision, but a really, really good shooter. And that's clearly been an emphasis for the Lakers, is adding to their war chest of shooters. And I think Hinson has the potential to be a two-way guy for them for the foreseeable future. So, a couple of swings on bigger forwards, which I like from the Lakers, guys that the type of profile of guys that they haven't necessarily gone after. They've tended to go for perimeter guys, smaller guys, or less athletic centers. So I think both of these guys are different archetypes than their typical two-way type. And I think it's a nice step in that direction for them. I don't know much about either pick, but the Lakers scouting department has a really good track record, and we'll get a better idea of them in a couple weeks when we see them at the California Classic and then Summer League in Las Vegas. That'll do it for today's show. Thank you so much for watching and listening. For those on YouTube, please be sure to hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, drop a comment, and like this video if you enjoyed it. And for those listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and your podcast platform of choice, please be sure to follow, download, and leave a 5-star review. I'll be back on Saturday with a reaction to the Lakers' 4 player options and what that means for their cap situation and just what that means for their future. And then I will also be back on Sunday for the first day of free agencies. So a lot of shows this week, a lot to cover. Hope you guys are enjoying my frequency, and I've been upping it a bit as things are ramping up. But thank you again for watching and listening, and I will talk to you soon.